welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on today's program, the Texans just released their unofficial depth chart ahead of their first preseason game up against the Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to break down the most shocking parts of that depth chart reveal because there's a couple guys that I thought the Texans were pretty high on, kind of listed lower in the depth charts. I'll break down everything you need to know from that unofficial depth chart. A little bit of housekeeping, some news and notes to break down. The Texans went ahead and signed another player in Dalton Keene. They actually signed him last year. The tight end fullback combo was on the Texans practice squad. Didn't really get any run last year. Ended up getting injured, but then the Texans liked what they saw from him apparently, so they're bringing him back once again. Another injury note to break down. I talked about it yesterday on the show. Cam Robinson went down with injury. I saw a video from my guy Aaron Wilson around, the Texans offensive line doing their individual drills. Cam Robinson walking behind those guys, kind of talking around the group. He wasn't in pads today, but he seemed fine on the sidelines. He was just wearing a leg sleeve, so nothing really structural support there. So that's a great sign for Cam Robinson. They'll likely, slow play it like they do a lot of their injuries, and we won't see him for maybe a week or two, but it looks like Cam Robinson is just fine. And speaking of slow playing injuries and coming back from injury, two guys back at practice, kind of. Damian Pierce and Christian Harris were back in practice today. They were in pads, but they were still kind of doing their own drills on the side, ramping them up. I doubt that we'll see either of these guys in this first preseason matchup up against Minnesota, but it's good to at least see them back out there with pads on. I know they're not fully in the team drills, but still, hey, great sign to see them at least almost back at practice. And speaking of all these injuries, speaking of all these guys coming back, I don't want you to jinx it. I want everybody to send the good vibes, send the good energy. Go down and like today's video if you want our guys to stay healthy during this off-season period, during training camp, preseason. We need all the good luck we can get, so knock on wood, get your rabbit's foot, do whatever you need to do. Go down and like the video if you want the Texans to stay relatively healthy throughout this preseason process. So here is the unofficial depth chart that the Texans released today, and I know it's a lot, kind of small lettering in there as well, but don't worry, I'm going to be breaking down each and every position group that I think y'all need to look at in this Texans unofficial depth chart. First up, let's break down the wide receiver room. The first thing that caught my eye, the Texans listed three wide receivers as the starters. Obviously, Nico Collins, and then the next two were rookie Jaden Higgins and then the guy they traded for in Christian Kirk. These were the top three wide receivers. But I really wanted to look at that next line of guys, right? The next three that were listed, Xavier Hutchinson, Jalen Noel, and Justin Watson. Those were the next three, and then they listed Wayne, Berrios, and Mechie. But this made me wonder, do the Texans keep 7 wide receivers on this roster? And it's interesting that they have Justin Watson ahead of John Mechie already on the depth chart. I wonder if that's just, positional flex of how they like these guys, or if they actually view Watson as somebody who has a better chance to make this roster than a John Mechie. Also, is Xavier Hutchinson making the 53-man roster? Each and every offseason, he's been on that roster bubble, and each and every offseason, it seems that he's one of the final guys to make this 53-man. Obviously, the Texans drafted 2 of his Iowa State guys in Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel. Well, we have 3 Iowa State Cyclones in the wide receiver room. He also helps out with a ton in special teams. So that's going to help Hutch end up either making the 53-man roster or at least being right there on the edge of making it. Very interesting to see how this wide receiver room shakes out. And I said maybe they keep 7 wide receivers because, well, I'll get into it later on whenever I talk about the special teams. Next up, let's talk about the tight end room, though, because this I had a little bit interesting as well. As we look at the tight end depth chart that, the Texans just released out there, Dalton Schultz, tight end 1. Cade Stover, tight end 2. Then it was Brevin Jordan. Irv Smith Jr. was the next one listed. And it was funny, the next guy they listed after Irv Smith was Jakob Johnson. Very interesting. They actually didn't list a fullback on this depth chart, which I found kind of weird because I feel like Jakob Johnson is definitely a fullback. I think British Brooks last year was used as a fullback, but they have them respectively with running backs and tight ends. So I don't know if they're just kind of hiding the fact that they're going to use a fullback, maybe they're going to use a tight end in a fullback role once again. But kind of interesting. And then they had Jakob Johnson, as I mentioned, ahead of Luke Lachey, the 7th-round pick out of Iowa. He's buried on the depth chart. They still had Stover as the tight end, too. Like I've been saying, all three of these tight ends, Dalton Schultz, Cade Stover, Brevin Jordan, have showed out this offseason. But right now, it's still Dalton Schultz, the starter, Stover, the backup, and Brevin Jordan as the tight end 3. And as I mentioned, the little teaser before, punt and kick returners. This was very, very interesting in my opinion. Who they had as the punt and kick returners on this new depth chart. I was like, I expected Braxton Berrios to be the punt return guy, maybe the kick return guy as well. And this is why I'm thinking maybe the Texans keep 7 guys in the wide receiver room if he's going to start at one of the special team spots. But they also had Dameon Pierce, who hasn't really practiced at all this offseason. He's been doing the kick return duties the past couple of years. They still had him as the starter in terms of kick returns. The other guys they had in there, they had Christian Kirk as the 3rd punt return man, so maybe a break glass in case of emergency, especially being that he's had a great camp and one of the starting receivers for this team. I really like Jalen Knoll, though, which I'll talk about here in just a second. But I want to know, do you think Braxton Berrios is going to make this roster as a return man? I don't know how much he adds to the wide receiver room, but do they, spend one of those 53 roster spots on a guy just to return the ball? Let me know. Give me a yes, give me a no down in the comment section. This is going to be the pinned comment on today's video. So if you get hit with the YouTube ad break here, all good. Scroll on down and give me your answer. Will Braxton Berrios make this roster? I'm about 50-50 on whether or not he'll make the roster. At the end of the day, I think it all comes down to one man on whether or not Braxton Berrios makes this roster. And I think that one man is rookie Jalen Knoll. If he can show that he's the punt return guy, if he can take over those duties and, Frank Ross, the special teams coordinator, if he can give him an assurance like, hey, I can be the guy throughout the year, then that kind of makes Braxton Berrios a little bit expendable, right? You don't really need somebody who's not going to help in the wide receiver room if he's just going to be a punt return guy, if you already have somebody who's good at that in Jalen Knoll. And then the other part of it is the kick return duties, because they have Dameon Pierce, who I believe to be on the roster bubble as well, but they listed him as the, RB2 without Joe Mixon in the lineup right behind Nick Chubb. Do they keep him as a kick return man and somebody in the running back room? That is something that is yet to be seen, but I really am interested to see. I don't think Dameon Pierce plays this week. Hell, he's not even, full contact in practice yet. He's just back in pads. But the third preseason games of this year, I'm really interested to see Dameon Pierce, how he looks out there, his progression, and how the Texans use him. Now, coming up, 2 observations on the defensive side of the football. I'm going to look at the depth chart on that side and tell you 2 things that kind of surprise me a little bit. Before I get into that, though, if you need a brand new Texans hat, I got you covered with our friends over at Fanatics. You go to chatsports.com/Texans hats. They have all different shapes, sizes available. These, the new H-Town, these were the draft hats, the new H-Town logo. Those look pretty dope. They also have, trucker hats. They have flat bills. They have, dad hats. They have beach hats. Anything that you want, they have over there. Chatsports.com/Texans hats. That link will be available in the comment section and description of today's video. Go check them all out. Do a little window shopping because, hey, we all need a good Texans hat here and there. You can't always wear your Texans jersey out, but hey, you have a dope Texans hat just like this one. I actually really like this one. You can go check it out right now at this link. All right, let's look on the defensive side of the football. Defensive tackles I found quite interesting because this whole offseason I've been saying, I think Tim Settle could be one of the starters. But in the unofficial depth chart, he was not listed as one of the starters. They had Mario Edwards Jr. and Sheldon Rankins as the 2 guys starting on the interior. No really surprises on the outside. Will Anderson Jr., Danielle Hunter, those are going to be your 2 guys all at the edge rushing spots. But it is to be noted, there's a lot of guys on the PUP list right now. You still have DeMeco Ryans, Foley Fatukasi, Derek Barnett, among others who are still injured, not back in the starting lineup yet, or not back available to practice. So I do think it's interesting that they put Mario Edwards Jr. above Tim Settle, but at the end of the day, for the defensive tackles, those guys are going to rotate very often. We're going to see a mix and match of guys throughout games this year. You're going to see, Tim Settle get plenty of snaps. You're going to see Mario Edwards Jr. I'm pretty sure Danico Autry, Foley Fatukasi, once they're back, they'll be in the mix of guys who are getting a ton of snaps on the interior. So I don't take a ton of stock in the defensive tackle room on where they keep them. It's just who's going to make the roster. And I'm pretty sure Mario Edwards Jr., Tim Settle Jr. are locks to make the roster as of right now. Lastly, the last surprise, and this might have been one of the biggest surprises for me, is the linebacking room. And I've been telling you the Texans run a lot of 4-2-5, and they kind of displayed that with their depth chart. They only listed 2 linebackers as the starters, Azeez Al-Shaiir and Henry To'oTo'o as the starting guys at the linebacker spot. But the guys behind them were the ones that interested me. They had Hansen as one of the premier backups, and they had Christian Harris as the other first backup for Azeez Al-Shaiir and Henry To'oTo'o. And for somebody who's getting a lot of reps with the first team, and EJ Speed, they listed him behind Christian Harris, who has yet to practice at all this offseason. Why? EJ Speed, I thought, has been looking pretty good in training camp so far. Christian Harris, still a huge unknown. I don't know if this is bias from the coaching staff and being like, Christian Harris, he's still our guy. We still want to hold out hope for him. We're really hoping that he can get back to form this year. I hope, this is indicative of, playing time of EJ Speed not getting on the field, because I think he's a really good weapon to have in the linebacking core this year. But Azeez Al-Shaiir, Henry To'oTo'o, same starters from last year, look like they're kind of claiming their positions this year. But I'm really interested to see how they use EJ Speed, especially with Christian Harris getting ramped back up into practice. Now, I told you what surprised me the most from that depth chart. What surprised you the most from the Texans' unofficial depth chart? Let me know down in the comment section, was it something that I mentioned, or did I miss something? Because for me, none of these surprised me. Offensive line, defensive backs, the running backs, they didn't really surprise me. The only kind of semi-surprise was they had a Wale ahead of Woody Marks, but still, Woody Marks is a rookie, and for somebody who is a pass-catching back, I think they like a Wale kind of as a more sure-handed guy, and obviously the quarterbacks. CJ Stroud, Davis Mills, nothing really to see there. But all this doesn't mean anything. The stuff on paper, that's nada. It's once those cleats hit the field, and we will be seeing it this Saturday, 3 p.m. Central Time, as the Texans face the Minnesota Vikings. And actually, my producer right now, Alper, he'll be our live producer. We're going live an hour before kickoff. We got to beat those stinking Vikings on and off the field. I'm ready to see what these Texans backups have. And I kind of laid down the gauntlet earlier this week. I said a sub battle between us and Vikings. Now we kind of got some tread back, right? We were down by I think 30 subs. Now we're only down by 8. Continue to hit that subscribe button. Let's beat Vikings now on and off the field. If you made it to the end of the video, go down and hit that subscribe button and help us beat the Vikings channel this week as we get ready for our first live watch party of the year. Once again, this Saturday, 2 o'clock Central Time is when we're going live. Set your calendars, be there or be square, because we will be rooting on our Houston Texans. And like I said, the depth chart revealed today, that doesn't mean anything. It's how these guys play on the field.